Welcome back, everybody. Today we're discussing Loki Season 2, Episode 4, titled Heart of the TVA. The episode begins with us returning to the citadel of He Who Remains and the conversation between Miss Minutes and Renslayer. Miss Minutes shows us where this little audio clip from before came from.
You are quite a marvel.
I will be proud to lead with you.
And I'm just so curious as to why this audio was left for Loki to find, and ultimately who left it here. It just seems unlikely that this was simply a coincidence, but more on that later on. The big takeaways from this scene were that Renslayer and He Who Remains were partners during the multiversal war, where he tamed Goliath and put an end to the fighting. She was his general, and depending on how this series ends, I think they are setting us up to see Renslayer as a part of like the main cinematic universe. After all, we're just hearing about her abilities and leading a Kang army to victory. Now, like, imagine what that must look like. I feel like that's a good opportunity for them to further elaborate on this story in the main cinematic universe. He Who Remains lets his partner leave and tells Miss Minutes to erase her memory alongside everybody else's at the TVA. It's assuming this does not include OB, though the explicit verbiage says otherwise. It could also mean that OB doesn't exist in this past version, which may be the case. After all, OB was a character that came into play after Season 1, where He Who Remains explicitly warns us that the other versions of himself are coming. It's entirely possible that some sort of twist with OB is still coming, though let me think on that a little bit more. And also, I think I might make a standalone video about this. Honestly, OB kind of just shows up and we all just take it with a grain of salt that he's not ultimately just the super bad guy, right? Miss Minutes and Renslayer talk about being badass babes who don't need no man, and it spells out exactly what their intentions are. Power, wealth, and fame. Everything Goldie Roger achieved when he became king of the pirates. It's curious if Miss Minutes and Renslayer are really on the same page here, with us knowing how Miss Minutes has been previously. Maybe she was being genuine, and this is a team girls get it done type moment, but I don't know. Maybe it's just really her pulling the strings for like an ultimate power play in the long run. After all, her biggest motivation is more autonomy, her wanting a body, and she was designed by the person who just fundamentally just, fucks over their partners, right? It seems pretty likely that this is where this is leading. The title screen rolls, Victor Timely pops into the TVA, and we have a wonderful moment where he gets to kind of just explore his own creation all alone. That is, of course, until B-15 ruins his solace. Mobius and Loki join and offer to explain everything if he complies. They demand his trust, and Victor outright states that he has a lack of trust for the entirety of the world. He demands answers, but the decaying state of the Loom just grabs his attention. He inexplicably knew what the Loom falling apart sounded like through the unvoid of not-so-space-time, but after that we come to Judge Gamble. She talks with B-15 about what to do with Dox and the other rebels, explaining in the past that they would just prune them, but they both feel that that's not possible now or not how they want to exist. It's really curious. Dox is the only reason that they are even still standing where they are, though it wasn't called into question this episode like I hoped that it would be. Maybe because none of them actually believed that they were at risk of this thing exploding, but I don't know. Seems like they missed some kind of opportunity for additional dialogue or drama here, and I really would have liked to see that. It's just so weird that they are demanding drastic and immediate change instead of continuing to do what works in order to buy themselves more time for a solution. Like, why not just prune the timelines where Britney Spears posted this video? It must be the majority of them, and it feels like this would be just undeniable proof that the timeline was on its way to terrible things. They say this new system will be better, but we still don't know their actual plan, just to increase capacity to account for new timelines, and like I've said previously, it's either all of the timelines, including the ones that spell their demise, or we are back to a system where they are giving moral consideration to timelines that benefit their existence and much less to, or even none, to those that would mean its demise. In which case, they have to admit that He Who Remains was just right. Like, at the end of the day, He Who Remains is just right. The conversation ends with B-15 being tasked to change Dox's mind, to get her to help instead of fighting against them, but Dox is just right here. Again, pruning these timelines needed to happen, and it needed to happen again while they were sitting in this cell talking. We then come to the motley crew fumbling through the bowels of the TVA, Victor Timely trying to grapple with how he actually created this place, and we come to OB and Casey. Victor Timely and Ouroboros meeting was just... It was wonderful. They acted like each other's biggest fans and told us explicitly that Obi wrote the book based on Victor Timely's writing, which was based on Obi's guidebook, and the cycle continues. The snake eating its own tail. Ouroboros. I love that this moment was so positive, and Obi considers he who remains a decent person. It's still possible that Obi had his memories erased at the very start of all of this, just like Renslayer, but right now, nothing hints at that. He's the only person that remembers anything, and it's likely because erasing his memory would put the cycle at risk, though again, it could be Obi having much more power than we're being led to believe. One thing to note is that we may still see like Obi's writing of the guidebook. We see the formative years where Victor is coming into existence and understanding the world through Obi's writing, but we do not see the same for Obi. It would be interesting to see if they include this and exactly when in the cycle it happens, but ultimately it might not be necessary. They discuss going down the gangway, loading the device Victor made in order to save the day. It's a great plan, a great model, and a great jab at Sylvie.
Made it when someone killed He Who Remains and released all those branches and ruined my life.
This moment really makes it feel like Obi has such knowledge about the way things are here, far more than just being the person resigned to the basement. And he just objectively believes that they work, that He Who Remains was right, and that certainty just pushes me in that direction as well, which would be a great bad guy. Again, man, is Obi a bad guy? Is Obi a bad guy? I really do not know. If you think about it, they created the problem that they now face by creating the Loom in the first place. And Sylvie killing its user was only part of the equation that really put us in this situation. They talk about making the rings bigger and how the space here is now filled with much more temporal radiation. It's a great setup because we know this was a dangerous task before, and now they have to do it again with higher stakes, but ultimately we know how to do it, and they just need to execute more effectively than they did before, which we know was kind of sloppy. This build-up for the reveal later on was just so well done. Mobius and Loki discuss who needs to go out, and Victor reflects on being that person, adding to the equation when he gets the first opportunity to do so. He calls this little device that he made a prototype, and the first thing that came to mind was him calling things prototypes as a way to avoid explaining why they were faulty. It was a subtle hint that the plan involving a known con man was about to fail. Loki, Mobius, and Sylvie leave, and she starts berating him about why there is a time and place for pie. It's a bit odd. Frankly, she's not suggesting alternative options, she just wanted to make Mobius feel bad about himself, bringing up that he hasn't looked at the timeline to see where he's actually existing or where he's from or like what he could be. It's curious dialogue, and on the surface provides nothing but letting us know that Sylvie is upset with Mobius. But I really feel like it could be more. Like they're leaning into this idea of Mobius's place being something of import, and I think it's kind of the biggest takeaway here. Like the entire dialogue, I think this is the purpose of it. Maybe he's a variant of some kind, maybe a jet ski champion that was meant to stop Britney Spears from posting the video. I don't know. Whatever it is something important though. We then come to Brad trying to convince the others to his cause. Dox knocks him down a peg and reminds him of his treachery. His point here is that he believes that they have all earned their lives back and should be able to return to wherever they came from. Him being a beacon of what true free will would be in the grand scale of things is probably a good indicator of how the showrunners will shape the finale. If we all just bugger off to our own timelines, more suffer. The middle ground becomes not true free will, not the current over-pruning system, or over-policing, you could also call it, but a system that maintains as many branches as possible and acknowledges the sacrifice of the innocents on each of the timelines that go bad. If we knew this was how the universe worked and bad timelines faced the possibility of being pruned, I feel like that would be the most unifying force imaginable. You're not only being a good person for your survival, but the survival of everything, the entire reality that you perceive. It's kind of a cool philosophy or religion. I don't know. Comment below if you're going to start being a good person so your timeline doesn't get pruned. And honestly, I guess I'll play the TVA, judging whether you're worthy or not. I don't know. I'm just trying to drive engagement. B-15 enters and offers them an open hand instead of a fist. She wants Doc's help to prevent the TVA from being corrupted, being overthrown by Renslayer or anyone else that they may face. The conversation ends with uncertainty, but B-15 does a good job of showing that their interests align. Unfortunately, we all know that this is for nothing. Sylvie accidentally makes her way to Key Lime Pie land, and they have a great conversation about ruling and right or wrong. They talk about Thor and the shame that Loki feels for shaming his brother when he called him soft. They discuss the living timelines and the dead ones, and how they could be wrong in what they've done. How much easier it is to destroy than it is to create and manage. How hard it is to have hope.
You can't give people free will and then just walk away, Sylvie. That's not how it works. Now, for better or for worse, the timelines are free. It's up to us to protect them. It's up to us to do better than he who remains.
This moment I just adore, because it outright says their intention is not pure free will like Sylvie originally wanted. It's to rule, fully believing that they could do it better than he who remains. It's delusion of grandeur to believe that you know right and wrong, order and chaos for an infinity of people. But this was an important moment, maybe the thesis of the entire season. How do you rule people? The fact of the conversation is, like I've said before, there are only two options for the pure free will that Sylvie is after. The TVA expands capacity to account for an infinite number of infinitely increasing timelines that could exist in the multiverse, including the ones that spell its own demise, or the TVA and the Loom get destroyed. There is no 100% free will if they are still picking and choosing which timelines are dangerous to order and which are beneficial to it. Those timelines and the worlds that reside there are still being murdered. The idea of ruling people and deciding things for them is a massive responsibility. And the truth is, the people we put in power, that is us giving them control over our lives and some of our own power. That's why I fully believe that if you don't like the people in power, you got to do what you must for your perspective to be heard. That's all we can do, right? That's what Sylvie did. But ultimately, it's not as simple as just deciding the future for the multiverse and walking away. You can't just kill governance and dip back home. Vacuums like that are why Afghanistan, on this very day of me posting a video about Loki, is ruled by the Taliban, and women are silenced, beaten, and murdered for trying to exist with the same liberty that American women currently have. But you know what? That's free will, isn't it? That's another country who had a group of people take power and enforce how they want to exist. Their perspective is that they are doing this morally good thing, and they're protecting the virtue of a lesser counterpart. I mean, that's why they do it. It's quite narcissistic to believe that my beliefs are better than theirs, but we all do that to some extent when we weigh our systems of morality and governance. To be perfectly clear, my beliefs are better than the Taliban's. But my point is that we need some systems of control, or our individual perspectives will supersede each other's until the point where somebody comes out on top and creates a system for their control. It seems like the most human thing to believe that our system would be better, but she killed he who remains, and suddenly the entirety of all of the people that he protected became her responsibility because she had the power. So they discussed the best ways forward, not murdering people to ease the system, while not murdering people is the reason that the system is failing. It's a terrible system that requires the murdering of timelines to exist, which comes back around to why I think the TVA must be destroyed for true free will to exist. And jumping ahead, I was pretty stoked to see what happens later on, right? But with that in mind, I do think we are a people that needs to be ruled. Like, we need leaders. We need people that can think critically about the world and try to find middle ground for everybody in the conflicting interests. We need to consider a categorical imperative whenever we can, and at the end of the day, we must just be fair to all that we can, including variants of monsters who may or may not become world eaters later in life. We're in this Minority Report situation where we must ask if it's okay to kill someone who has not committed a crime when you fully believe with every fiber of your being that they will commit that crime. The answer is no. Morally, we take away their ability to choose, and if we were treated the same way, it would be obvious that someone is abusing their power or superseding our perspectives with their own, ultimately removing our autonomy. But finding the middle ground of true free will and acknowledging that we need to have some sort of governance working for the majority approved subjective good is where it seems like we're heading. I think they are plainly saying that they will be better through diversity. It won't be a single man making these decisions. It will be a diverse group of people deciding what stays and what dies. And they will probably try to reduce the weight of what pruning a timeline actually means so that it doesn't feel like they're murdering people for a perceived greater good. Maybe they turn the land that Eliath was in into some form of afterlife, or the land beyond time. Whenever you're pruned, you appear there, like able to continue living, but no longer posing a threat to polite society. Applying this to the first episode, for instance, Loki doing this would cause him to be pruned, and then probably secretly pruned, and then maybe sent to the end of time, but everything looks and feels like he is still on his path for world dominance, and he can continue with what he perceives to be a normal existence. That is entirely just a shot in the dark about how I would personally work within the system to rework pruning, but it seems like reworking pruning in some way would be a great way to find middle ground. Like, they're after a real council of timekeepers, representing as many of the perspectives as you possibly can throughout the universe, and deciding what is and isn't acceptable for utilitarian happiness. And if you fail, through no fault of your own, you live out the remainder of your life as you would, but have in reality been pruned from the sacred timeline to keep everybody else safe. It's definitely not perfect, and 100% does remove a degree of free will. It still imposes our understanding of right and wrong over other people, but that's the middle ground, and we already kind of do that in this reality. It's what governments do. We all agree that murder is bad and then lose our free will to murder. In theory, they could do this, and to the best of their ability, decide what would be best for all, and then have some responsibility to do this exact thing, because after all,
We are gods.
Before we move on from this long-winded section, I just wanted to point out the camera work here. This is a powerful moment. Demanding that you are a god would normally be backlit, have a close-up angle to make it seem and just make you feel more big and powerful, but they're tiny, standing in this mysterious place that dwarfs them, pretending to have an understanding about where they even are. With what they're describing, it turns this moment that would normally be, I'm a god, I can do whatever I want, to, I'm a god, I have to do the right thing. And I just think that's pretty neat. We then come to Dox and X5 talking about what to do, and in enters Renslayer.
And you, this is really disappointing, I must say.
I know, I'm working on myself.
I love this. Like, passive-aggressive Miss Minutes is doing the Lord's work here. Renslayer offers the group freedom on the timeline if they want it, and all but X5 refuses. In comes the cube. This moment was brutal. I did not expect it in the slightest, and it set the tone for the later reveal without revealing anything at all. It was great, unexpected, and holy moly, I cannot believe that happened.
How does it feel, knowing that all of us here would rather die than follow you out that door?
Look at Miss Minutes just enjoying this brutal murder. Like, oh, good God. She is such a big player this season. If she is like controlling the strings in a meaningful way behind the scenes, I hope she is. I don't know. She's so cool. We come back to Victor discovering hot cocoa and B-15 discovering the sizzling remains of her former co-workers. She gets a mocking access denied, and we come back to the man destined to become he who remains being enthralled by hot cocoa. He offers D90 some, and this moment is just really strange. He does the snap thing like he did when he was scamming the crowd and really focuses on the machine, like he realized some grand truth about who or what He Who Remains was actually doing here. There could be hidden depth here, but there really is a good chance he was just a dude who really enjoys cocoa and was pleased that He Who Remains thought to create this. Like, maybe He Who Remains just also really loved cocoa, you know? And if we're taking it at face value, they're the same person, so it makes sense. And he was like, "Oh my God, I'm this person, and you're that person, and we both like hot cocoa." And like, I don't know. It could be anything. Just he loves hot cocoa, okay? D90 gets pruned, and X5 stares at the cup and the cocoa on the floor. New Rockstars has a video out, and they talk about how they believe the people dying are being turned into key lime pie or now the hot cocoa. It could be that. I really don't know why, but it does. It has something to it, right? He does stare at this liquid spilled on the ground and apologizes as if he was talking to former friends of his, like the people that were just squeezed into a bloody pulp. but I don't know, buddy. It's a stretch. Obi gets locked out of the systems. We have a joke about downloading unauthorized games, and we realize that Miss Minutes was the person locking them out. The gang meets back up and starts searching for Renslayer as the building shakes. Victor meets Miss Minutes and Renslayer again and tries to sweet talk his way out before quickly being cut off. Renslayer demands the location of the device, and it doesn't seem like he wants to give it.
Sylvie? You okay?
Yeah, I just hate that clock.
He takes the stairs, and we see a Loki from the past holding the device that will show him when he needs to be pruned. This was such a cool reveal, showing us that we were about to see the other perspective of the pruning. We then see the hallway, the green light, and the panic. Then the phone rings. He gets pruned, and we learn that it was Obi on the other end of that phone. During the first episode, it felt like somebody controlling the puppet strings, making sure that they got where they needed to be. This episode, it was kind of just made to appear that Obi wasn't doing that with this phone call, that they were just using the older tech maybe to avoid being locked out by Miss Minutes. To me, it still feels like a third version of themselves, or a third party entirely controlling the strings in some kind of way. I'm not so sure that we have all the information to properly understand the cycle. For instance, the Loki we watched get pruned and then pulled from time believed themselves to be the present day Loki. We watched him this entire time believing he was present day Loki, and now he is the Loki pruning a past version of himself. Other videos call this a closing of the loop, but maybe that recently pruned Loki will continue forward fully believing himself to be the present day Loki. Then, depending on whatever happens and what that variant time version of himself does, will impact everything else, and so on and so forth. Perhaps this loop is designed to keep going until a Loki solves the problem that they face. It's still pretty unclear, truthfully, but if they wish to make it easier to follow, they will just say that this was the closing of the loop. But I don't know. Back in episode 1, when Loki was time-slipping, it really felt like, to me, as though he was being purposefully placed in different places to learn information or understand the world better. Of course, it was a device used to actually make us understand the world better, but realistically, it could have also been applied if someone in the system, or in a version of time or version of himself or anything like that, was trying to help this next version in a similar way that He Who Remains helped the next version of himself by giving him the book, right? It's very possible that this is happening with Loki. Like, why was he placed right in front of a private audio recording of Renslayer and He Who Remains? Why is that just there? You know, like, what happened? Why? It just feels like some kind of being with a higher understanding of the situation put him there. The recording, the cameras, the loop, the fact that this place just forces people to go certain places, like when Sylvie ended up at Pyland, or the weird memory thing. It all just feels like we could be leading to a big reveal that somebody is still controlling this entire thing, and we still have not met them. Or maybe we have, and it's just, you know, hiding in plain sight kind of thing. Looking at you, Obi. They talk about taking down the dampeners that prevent people from using magic, and Loki and Sylvie both agree.
Turn it off!
Now, I'm curious if the future version of Loki, like the Loki that pruned our perceived present day Loki, also didn't instruct Obi to turn off the security system that allowed magic. I wonder if this wasn't the reason that he was time slipping and everybody kept saying how impossible it was to happen at the TVA, or how they couldn't reconcile it. Entirely a guess. It just feels like turning this off was kind of a big blunder in hindsight, and maybe it has impacted more than just our perceived present. Now, Miss Minutes gets shut down, and good God, I loved this moment.
Victor, I need to tell you.
It seems like two versions of Miss Minutes here. One that is genuinely trying to tell Victor something meaningful, and one that just...
You'll never be him.
Perhaps Miss Minutes has some variants that we don't know about, and if you asked me in season 1, it would probably be just as unlikely as somebody time-slipping in the TVA, but here we are. The clock fades and we see He Who Remains staring directly at us, and in turn, Victor is haunting. Like, maybe he is still watching over things and his influence is reaching far beyond the grave, or he is still controlling the strings. It's unclear. X5 goes to investigate and gets taken over by Sylvie. He prances in, prunes Renslayer, and they make a run for the Loom. Victor makes it back, puts his head in a fun little microwave, and here we are, just a full acknowledgement that they designed the most unsecure system in the cosmos because they could just go back in time. Anyone could just go back in time and get a previous version of whomever locked the system. It's a bleak moment for cybersecurity people across the multiverse. Anyway, they tell Victor the plan. He says that it's time to be brave, and this was magical. It just shows us that he could be good. He could be the best version of himself that does things for others instead of being a con man that only looks out for himself. Maybe they have made a positive change for him. They made me believe for a moment that the plan was working, that they were going to be able to redesign the system of oppression that they just overthrew into a socially acceptable system of oppression. Tell me why I just about screamed, just shock when he started dissolving. I was floored. I stood up and just waited in silence as I tried to consider how they get out of this. Then it happens. The Loom explodes, and their attempt to control time becomes an unimaginably large wall of flame speeding towards them. It was absolutely perfect, just so unexpected and well done. Such a jaw-dropping moment, and entirely made up for the somewhat meh episode last week. This could be the end of this version of all of them, or just like we saw when Loki was pruned last season, this could also spell some, anime episode where everybody is transported somewhere else. I really feel like it's super open-ended about what they could do here, and the idea of looping back around or seeing what the next version of Loki that was just pruned makes me kind of wonder if they will explore those routes or just acknowledge the loop is closed. I really want it to be the former, but with that, we come to the end of the episode. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please be sure to leave a like, a comment, and even subscribe to show your support. I do this thing entirely by myself. It's a great time, but seeing that you enjoy it, or that you have issues with logic, or that you just want to add to the experience of others by being a commenter, it means so much to me. Like, let's talk about Loki together. Special thank you to the 42 rabbits that are currently marching in little circles on the floor above my apartment with tiny little walking canes and what I'm assuming are top hats. I hope whatever life you're living up there is rewarding, because damn, it's busy. Special thank you to Michael Link over on Patreon. Much love, and I cannot wait to talk to you all again soon.